yapido cheske hechi ataha yahido. Long ago, the land was covered with ice, and there was silence here. Lots of ice. And one fine sunny day, the ice began to melt, and you could hear the ice melt. If there were humans here, to hear this ice melt. The ice continued to melt, and one day there was a loud rushing torrent of water that came through this area, and it carved a deep valley into this land. Deep and wide valley. And the water continued to run in a mighty river. And there was silence here. The trees began to grow. The grass grew. And the flowers grew and bloomed. The birds began to sing. The animals began to walk the land. The Dakota people came to this land. There was death here, and there was birth here. High on the bluffs of the land became burial mounds, sacred burial mounds for the Dakota people that were in this land. As time passed, the Dakota people lived here. The men hunted bison and deer with bow and arrow and lances. The women cooked their food in fire. The women baked their earthenware jugs and containers in that fire as well. More time passed, and different people came here. The people that the Dakotas called the Washichus came here to live on this land, and they wanted furs from all the animals that were on this land. The Dakotas traded with these people, and more time passed. A different type of person came here. A different type of Washichu came here. They came here for a purpose. That purpose was to build a road, to cut down trees, and to build a town. Joe Brown's town. That town that you will be hearing about now. Aho, Matako Owasu.
It is August now, in the year 1852.
Well then, here we are. My town of Henderson begins today on this spot. I think to honor my beloved aunt, Margaret Henderson, with that name. Those trees will have to go. There will be steamboats here in the spring. We will need to clear a way for a landing and for a wagon road. But Charlie, you're in charge of this crew. You give the orders.
We'll start cutting these trees down first, and we'll pile up the good logs over here to put up a cabin for the winter. That way we can keep a few good men here over the winter to guard against claim jumpers.
Now there is an easy way up from the valley over there that leads to the plain up above, and 50 miles from here, and a little bit south and west, the Army is building a fort. You men are going to lay out a road that will go to that fort.
How come they want a fort that far away? That's wilderness out there.
Well, they have signed a treaty with the Indians, and they are going to be moving from their present location in southern Minnesota to that spot. The fort will be built between the Indians and the settlers, and we expect them to move up there this next spring.
We'll start off. Mr. Brown here tells me that the ice will come out of the river there along about April. There's plenty of steamboat traffic going up around then. Our landing will be ready by then. Our town will have a head start.
Yes, and any of you who are looking for work in the spring, apply to us in Henderson. There'll be work building the town, building wagon roads. I expect to make a little money myself hauling goods to the new fort for the government. And I expect to pay good wages.
Better be good wages. I'm tired of just looking at all these huge oaks and maples and basswoods.
I'm worried just looking at all these packs we have to carry.
You'll be happy we have plenty of food and good tents come this winter.
Yes, and to lay out the road, you will go up the draw and be sure to bring along some firewood and some water because it's going across the open prairie. Should take you about 2 weeks. I've scouted it out. When you get to where the fort is going to be built, there'll be a boat waiting for you, ready to take you down the river to meet me at the landing in St. Paul, and there I'll be with a bag of gold. Then we're going to have a good time. Bye, George.
I came here last year on my 21st birthday. Joe Brown got to talking with me on the street up in St. Paul and offered me the job of running his store here in Henderson. The Browns lived upstairs over the store, and I moved in with them. Families and workmen were crowded into the few buildings that were done. The sawmill ran night and day, and the green lumber was in great demand. Some didn't wait for the lumber and used logs for exterior walls. The little schoolhouse down by the river was of logs. I liked working in the store and keeping track of freight. Joe was back and forth to St. Paul, so I had a lot of responsibility. I left Germany when I was 14, so I've had a few years to learn to read and write English. The first Sibley County election was held back in October. I took office as county treasurer in January of this year. Joe was elected county recorder. He kind of runs things for the town and the county. I'm learning a lot about politics from him. I'm going to be a good Democrat like Joe and his friend Henry Sibley. My brother Fred is here now. We plan to go into business for ourselves. We will buy out Brown and put up our own building up the street away from the river. The water was very high last spring. That's good for traffic on the river, but makes buildings close by subject to flooding. Business is good. The town has been plotted, so lots are changing hands. Farmland on both sides of the river is pretty well taken up. That little ferry boat is back and forth many times a day.
Read all about it. Get your first issue of the Henderson Democrat. Hot off the press. First issue. Get the latest news. Read all the advertising.
It says here in the June 12th Democrat that the Red Wing Land Office, when removed, will be located in Henderson.
Yeah, I heard rumors old Joe was going to pull that off. It was tough going for the surveyors working both sides of the river. I suppose the maps will be in the new land office.
They will smell like whiskey. The government survey crew has rented the Peasley and Clark Saloon. Yes, the building owner, Old Gucci, can get more out of the government than out of those young saloon keepers.
Old Joe's doing all right by this town. He's putting Henderson on the maps.
Several months have gone by. It is now October. The trees are changing color.
I'm Sarah Clark. I am the teacher here. We've started the fall term in our new building. Summer school ended in August in the old school. The scholars worked very hard and accomplished our goals even though it was a warm summer and the building much too crowded. The children laugh and play and learn eagerly here in this wonderful new school. Meetings are held here at night. Back in June, the Democrat editor very kindly published my poem about children. I'll recite just the first stanza. There's not a spot on earth to find so lovely as where children meet. There's not a sound in nature's voice like childhood's laugh your ears to greet. You know, I'll be retiring from teaching after this term. I'm to be married then. My beau is well known on the river. That dashing man, Captain Nelson Robert of the riverboat Time and Tide, will be my husband.
I've gotta go now. Ma, I don't need a clean shirt. I know it's the 4th of July. I'll be late. This steam tractor and wagon are going to run on Main Street. Guys can get rides. No, Sissy, you can't go along. The wagons are huge. We have to climb way up. The girls can't climb in skirts and petticoats. Get out on the street and watch, Ma. You've never seen anything like old Joe Brown's steamer. It's going to run stuff over to Fort Ridgely faster than those ox teams can.
Half of the men of Henderson have rushed off to fight the Indians attacking New Ulm. Adam Buck's 7th Regiment recruits never even got to Fort Snelling. They have no uniforms, very little food, and are carrying any kind of old hunting gun you can imagine. Oh dear, what will happen to us all?
Maybe we should get on the ferry and go to the other side of the river. It seems so much safer here knowing we have soldiers stationed here and others quartered nearby at Leesore and over west by Lake Titlow. Suppose those Indians thought they could get away with something with fighting in the south. Seems like every able man is in uniform.
Hear it, Ma? That whistle means the first passenger train is coming to the depot over at the East Henderson. I'm going down to the ferry landing to see if any passengers come here.
It is November 17th, 1870. The scene is a gravesite in Brown Cemetery.
When word came to St. Paul, I didn't want to believe Joe Brown was dead. He was away again in New York, seeing to his 3rd steam tractor model. He worked on one transportation scheme or another since he started this town way back in '52. I came by train to Henderson today with some of his brother Masons. It's time for me to speak. My acquaintance with Major Brown dates back 35 years. During all that long period, a friendship existed between us. When separated from each other, we corresponded frequently. We were generally of like opinion on questions of public policy, and especially did we accord in the belief that justice of the oppressed and downtrodden Indian race demanded a total change of policy on the part of government and its agents. Major Brown was remarkable for his courage as well as for his equanimity. I have seen him in the heat of battle when bullets flew thick and fast around him. but his cheeks bleached not, nor did he evince by outward appearance that he was at all disturbed by the fact that he was liable at any moment to be struck down. But, my friends, this is neither the time nor the occasion to enter into details of the life and character of our deceased friend. This will be done by some competent hand hereafter, when the history of our political organization as a territory and state shall be written. No man stands forth more prominently as an untiring friend of Minnesota in all the phases of her existence than does Major Brown, and any history which does not mark him as among the first to labor efficiently for her advancement and general prosperity will be simply defective and incomplete. And now, my old tired friend, I leave you to of the long and lonely sleep. Peace to your ashes.
Many events occurred in the decade of the 1870s. Attorney Daniel Pickett began publication of the Sibley County Independent. He wore other hats as Sibley County Register of Deeds and as a real estate agent. The Independent soon put out the one-year-old rival paper, the Henderson Times, out of business. Thomas Welsh opened the first bank in the county, named Sibley County Bank, in 1874. He came to work for Joe Brown and never left Henderson. His house still stands on 6th Street. The brick Sibley County Jail was built in 1871 on a large lot designated as Courthouse Square. The old log jail burned in 1863, killing 2 soldiers who were locked up for being drunk and disorderly. They had set fire to their bedding to attract attention. The sheriff was away, and he had the only key in his pocket. The jail was so well built that a battering ram failed to get the door open in time to save the prisoners. The Sibley County Courthouse was built in 1879, centered on the square. The first Minnesota River Bridge was completed in 1878. There was a fine for $10 if you trotted your horse faster than at a walk. The Henderson Volunteer Fire Department was organized in 1878, replacing the original Hook and Ladder Company of 1859. St. Jude's Episcopal Church and the Methodist Church were completed in the 1870s, while St. Joseph's and St. Paul's were rebuilt in the 1880s and in 1905. Farmers were plagued by grasshoppers. Bounty payments were offered to farmers losing crops. Because Henderson was the county seat, loads of dead grasshoppers were brought in to be weighed and burned. The county total in July of 1875 was 431,128 pounds. Kelso Township topped the list at 99,791. Henderson had 84,896, and Jessamine had 9,538 pounds. A big flour mill was built on 4th Street. All the earlier grist mills had burned. H. Paler and Company had the biggest brick store on Main Street completed. The 1880s got off to a bad start. In 1881, with what was to become the 100-Year Flood.
Be in the boat, Mother.
No, Papa, no, Papa, no.
We have to go to the cow.
No.
She suffers. She hasn't been milked since yesterday.
I am scared of water, Papa.
Take your pail and get in the boat, Mama.
Taps. You drowned. I drowned. The kids will be like, Papa, I can't.
Mama, with the storm yesterday, I can't go alone. Get in the boat now. You know I don't know how to use the cow. That's what work. Now, I hope you will. I get you out of the water.
Ja, mach schnell, mach schnell.
An event occurred in 1881 which had an adverse effect on Henderson. The Minneapolis and St. Louis rail line entered Sibley County in Washington Lake Township, bypassing Henderson. New towns with depots developed. Travel to Henderson for supplies or to ship farm products declined. In 1882, the first class graduated from the Henderson High School. Ceremonies were held at the courthouse in the district court room. School events, funerals, and other activities took place in the courtroom or courthouse hall. The photograph here shows the class of 1893. On the stage, the elevated section of the courtroom where the judge and the attorneys and the jury rested. The last brickyard opened where solid bricks of local clay were made, which looked just like those being made in Henderson since the 1850s. The yard closed in 1915. In 1882, attorney William Lehman began a law practice which lasted 56 years, the longest in Henderson history. His last trip to the old courthouse was for his funeral in 1942. He always wore a top hat on the days he appeared in court. Civil War veterans organized the W.S. Hancock Post of the Grand Army of the Republic in 1886. The name honored a Union Army general and Gettysburg hero, under whom some Henderson men had served. In May, members carried out an order of the parent GAR organization. Graves of all veterans were decorated with flowers. Decoration Day became an annual event now called Memorial Day, when all graves are decorated. John Dempsey went into the retail business in 1889, using 3 different locations over time. Son Mark succeeded him, retiring in 1968. After 59 years, there is no longer a Dempsey store in town. Wagar's continues in Dempsey's last location, the Keller Building, that has housed stores since 1874. Henderson has had drugstores since 1858. Locations changed until 1935. At that time, druggist Fred Bender moved into the Wentker Building on the corner of Main and 5th. Ice cream is still dispensed at the front and pills at the rear. In 1893, John Gherkin's building went up on the northwest corner of Main and 5th. He ran a saloon in the east half. Other operators kept it going until Prohibition in 1918. Henderson's post office moved into the building in 1967. The post office will move back in and occupy the main floor when remodeling is completed. In 1897, Henderson went modern with the erection of the municipal powerhouse. Electricity could be ordered, one 16-candle power light bulb at a time. Fees were 50 cents per month per bulb for places of business, 40 cents per bulb for dwellings and barns. County commissioners refused electricity for the courthouse, but later ordered 100 bulbs to be installed in the ceiling of the courtroom. The Henderson Ladies Tourist Club was organized in 1898. This club follows the fire department as the second oldest organization in town. August 1900 headlines in local and city papers told of murder in Sibley County. Reporters and spectators crowded the courtroom during the trial of the man accused of stabbing his wife and 4 stepchildren. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. A scaffold was erected on Courthouse Square, where the prisoner met his fate after midnight on March 29, 1901. George McKenzie, Sibley County representative, proposed legislature in 1911, which ended capital punishment in Minnesota. In 1901, silent movies came to the Opera House. Mood music accompanied the action on the screen. The Opera House was the multiple-use auditorium over Brash Saloon, where silent films were shown from 1901 until 1913. Mood music accompanied movies here and in other locations until 1930. In the 1930s and 40s, free movies were projected against an outside wall of the community building on Wednesday nights. Concerts by the town band followed. Big crowds came to town, especially during Prohibition years. Women and children enjoyed the entertainment, while many menfolk visited the taverns where near beer was rumored to have been enhanced with moonshine. The first automobile in town arrived in 1904. More cars, then auto trucks, soon appeared on the sometimes dusty, sometimes muddy streets. Joe Brown's transportation dreams put Henderson on the map. His steam tractor and wagon of 1860 can be considered the forerunner of the modern semi-tractor trailer. He somehow perceived the convenience and importance of transportation anywhere, anytime. Henderson has had no train service since the 1950s, no bus service since the 1970s. Riverboats have not been stopping here since the 1870s, but the trucks keep rolling through town. Senator Albert A. Paler of Henderson promoted legislation which appropriated $1,000 toward a monument for Joseph R. Brown. Dedication ceremonies were held in September of 1910. The inscription on the base of the 32-foot-high shaft reads, Joseph R. Brown, pioneer, statesman, soldier, 1805, 1870. Founder of Henderson. The Henderson unit of the Women's Relief Corps was organized in 1911. Its purposes were to serve veterans of the Civil War and to promote patriotism. By 1915, the WRC had raised enough money to erect a memorial fountain on Courthouse Square. Through the years, veterans of all wars became their concern. A tradition ended on Memorial Day in 1980. Margaret Foltz and Frida Nelson, both in their 90s, carried their American flag and Women's Relief Corps banner in one last parade. The organization's charter was then retired. The flags and memorabilia were placed in the Sibley County Museum. In 1915, Gaylord proponents launched an all-out, successful campaign to move the county seat. In December, trucks, wagons, and cars were loaded with courthouse records, equipment, and staff. The convoy then proceeded in funeral fashion from the Henderson Courthouse up Fort Hill and on to Gaylord. The Gaylord City Hall became the temporary Sibley County Courthouse. An earlier attempt to move the county seat to Gaylord occurred in 1890. Propaganda opposing the move was circulated in English and other languages. Editor Gus Buck wrote an article in the newspaper explaining new uses for the old courthouse, which was purchased by the city for $3,000. He ended by saying, "Henderson can now boast of a real community building, the name by which it came to be called." America went to war with Germany in 1917. The illustration shows General Blackjack Pershing and the commander-in-chief of the entire Allied force, Marshal Foch. A temporary Wartime Conservation Act, prohibition of alcoholic beverage manufactured to conserve sugar and grain, went into effect. By 1919, most local servicemen had returned. In August, a charter was granted for the Henderson American Legion Post number 74. The 18th Amendment permanently banned the manufacturing and sale of alcoholic beverages. Moonshine makers soon had stills percolating deep in wooded ravines. Others perfected home-brewed beer. In 1927, Henderson marked a Diamond Jubilee, 75 years since its founding. The Legion Post was responsible for the highlight of the celebration, which was the dedication of the John Otherday Monument. The inscription on the stone reads, "In memory of John Otherday, noble Sioux chieftain, who piloted 62 whites to safety in the outbreak of 1862. Gravel roads and streets didn't deter bus passenger service. There were 7 buses running each day in 1927. Sleek Greyhound buses would serve the community from 1940 to 1979. Henderson was in the doldrums of the Depression, as was the rest of the country. A new civic organization called the Booster Club sponsored a sauerkraut festival to promote the town and stimulate business. Sauerkraut King Bitt Whitford ate 5 pounds of the smelly stuff and was featured in Ripley's for Believe It or Not. Sauerkraut Days fell victim to too much success and notoriety and was temporarily discontinued. Antique agricultural exhibitions were held from 1976 to 1980. Mosquito days lasted from 1981 to 1991. Sauerkraut days began again in 1992. An independent article in 1931 stated, "The Booster Club is arranging to lease some Petersdorf lakeshore for a bathing beach as the polluted condition of the river is dangerous to bathers," unquote. Fishing and swimming in the Minnesota River had provided entertainment for boys since Henderson began. Pollution began when the town developed waterworks and laid a sewer line down Main Street in 1913. This caused raw sewage to be dumped right into the river. Other communities upstream were also using the river for industrial and city waste disposal. And complaints of train passengers that boys who never wore bathing suits in the river were mooning the trains may also have given impetus to move swimmers away from spectators. The scene is Noack's Produce, Main Street, where the community bank is now. During the dark days of the Depression, an event occurred called the Bank Holiday, but it was not a time of celebration. A directive went out from President Franklin Roosevelt, closing banks all over the United States until financial reorganization could be completed. Henderson people recovered about 10 cents on the dollar. It's a Friday morning in March 1933. A burly farmer stops his team and wagon in front of Noack's Produce and walks in where manager Chesty Narr has just opened.
Good morning, you're up early. What have you got in your wagon for me today?
A couple cans of cream and a whole coop full of Buff Orpington chickens. And they're heavy, and I expect a good price. You can unload, we'll all go to the farmer's store for groceries. I'll be back with my team and my money.
Oh boy, I know he's a tough customer. I'll unload his wagon. We'll bring over to the bank, get some money, and be ready for the day's business.
Is he in for a surprise? Just wait. He'll be back soon.
I can't get any money at either bank. Nobody can get any money in this town, and it's full of angry people. What will I do? What will I do? If I can't pay off that moonshiner, I could be in real trouble. I've got an idea. Mr. Hepp keeps a jug under the counter to add to his soft drinks. He always has cash on hand from those customers. If I can get him to pay in advance for the chickens for his party next week, I'll be safe. Got it. I had to promise to clean the darn chickens myself. He's giving quite a party in the woods for his suppliers and best customers.
Well, I'm back.
Here's your money. Have a good trip home. That was a close call. I'm locking the door and pulling the shades. This produce is closed.
In April 1933, beer was again legal. Sales of liquor soon followed. The lifting of prohibition was enacted in Washington as an effort to stimulate the economy and lighten the mood of this country. Edwin Schultz is remembered.
When I was growing up in Henderson, I didn't know a great deal about team sports, except that in the summer we had the town baseball team. Big Jack Teagues was a great pitcher and a hero to most of the boys in Henderson. When Jack Teagues was pitching for the Henderson team, he would put a chaw of slippery elm or piss elm into his mouth and begin to chew it up. This piss elm was the inside bark of a red elm tree. After he had chewed this bark for a few minutes, it would become a wad of slime. Jack would spit a hunk of this slime onto the ball and pitch it into the batter. You could sometimes see the spit hanging down on the ball as it was traveling to the batter. The whole idea of this was that if the batter would hit the spit wad, the ball should either go right up or right down. It also made a mess out of the catcher's mitt.
Henderson has had 8 hotels. The first, the Valley House, opened in 1853. The largest was the Merchants Hotel with 32 rooms. It burned to the ground in 1909. The last hotel, the Boswell House, opened in 1908. William Herman was host there from 1935 to 1944. The only building left in Henderson which had been a hotel at one time is the east half of Wagar's store, built in 1885 as the Keller Hotel. Nels Jondro, a farmer living north of town, became owner and operator of the first Henderson school bus. Work on the addition to the public school began in 1939. At last, the school had a gymnasium and an auditorium. This construction provided jobs through the Works Project Administration, WPA. More space needs would develop with the closing of all rural schools in 1953. In October of 1940, draft registration began. As war continued in Europe, U.S. involvement seemed imminent. On December 7, 1941, Japanese airplanes bombed Pearl Harbor. Hitler, allied with Japan, declared war on the United States. An all-out war effort began. Suddenly, there were many jobs with not enough workers. Retired men and women replaced men who left for military duty. Some teachers and senior boys enlisted and left during the school year. Then the telegrams began to come. Wounded, missing in action, prisoner of war, killed in action. Wartime romances flourished. Alice Harmeyer and Chester Swenson were wed in March 1944. They left for the air base at Roswell, New Mexico, where Chester was flying B-17s. Alice, in her blue gown, was belle of the ball at an officers' club party. In 1949, the Sibley County Historical Society opened a museum in the house built in 1884 for the August F. Paylors. The Henderson Public Library occupied a large room in the building. Henderson's Centennial and Sauerkraut Days were celebrated together in 1952. A Pioneer Days theme dominated the lengthy parade. Carol Leesky reigned as queen. Henderson had a town band for most of its first 100 years. In 1892, the band won a competition and had Henderson Prize Band painted on their bass drum. In 1952, the band, under the direction of Margaret Fultz, was prize winner. The band was drenched by heavy rain as they marched in an aquatennial parade in Minneapolis. Their wool uniform shrank, causing high-water pants ever after. The decade of the 50s ended with the demise of the town band. In 1961, former band members were rounded up for one last practice. They played at the June 1961 retirement party for Margaret Fultz as she left the school faculty after 32 of her 51 years as a teacher. In October of 1958, conversion to automatic dialing ended 56 years of caller hearing, "Number please," from the switchboard operator. After a move in 1911, the telephone office overlooked Main Street. Observant operators were often able to help locate people. Edwin Schultz has related an example from the 1930s. As an only child, his mother felt compelled to keep track of him. She would ring Central and ask,
"Elsie, this is Emma. Have you seen Edwin? He just crossed the street about 10 minutes ago with John Dempsey. I'll ring Mabel. Maybe she knows." "Mabel, this is Elsie. Emma's looking for Edwin. Is he there?" "Okay, tell him his mother's looking for him. Thanks." "Emma, he's there. Mabel's telling him to come home." "You're welcome."
Another example from the last year of operator service concerned Mike McGuire, who grew up in Henderson. After law school, he was practicing in Le Sueur County when he was elected to the legislature representing Le Sueur and Scott counties. In February of 1958, he joined the Hendrickson law firm in Henderson. One day, a long-distance call came from St. Paul, requesting connection to the office of Attorney McGuire. The local operator answered.
"You don't want the office. I just saw Mike go into the bank. I'll connect you. Just ask for him there."
(1965) was the year of the big flood, the biggest since 1881. Much of Henderson was inundated. A temporary dike held back floodwaters in 1969. The permanent levee, completed in 1990, has held in recent flood years. Our town is protected, but roads and farm fields are periodically underwater. The key to St. Jude's Episcopal Church was given to Mayor Don Bender in 1965. The building then became the City Library. Elected justices of the peace have held office in Henderson since the town began. The office was abolished statewide in 1972. In remembering his experience in the Henderson Justice Court, longtime local attorney Ronald Hendrickson said,
"Mrs. Lillian Wiest, she was a Bosel, was the justice of the peace. She, the judge, never let me as the city attorney do the questioning. She'd start out, 'Now why did you do this?' I would say, 'I tell you, Judge, you have no right to ask all the questions.' She paid no attention to me. She held court in her house, the one right next to the Traxler house, the one they tore down. She sure was a clipper. A nice woman, but it was a joke with all the lawyers in this part of the state. They hated to come into her court. They never won a case from her. One good reason, she never paid any attention to an objection. She was very tenacious. She stayed digging and digging. Why did you do that? Why did you do this? I'll tell you one story that was quite interesting. The Justice of the Peace in Le Sueur came to Henderson one Saturday night. He had drunk too much and had to urinate on Main Street in front of all the people. The police picked him up. He called me to get him out of jail. She had no right to jail him on that type of crime. The time came for trial. He stated his own case, said he was a judge in Le Sueur and that he hadn't done anything wrong. Judge Wiest asked, "Well, why did you do that?" "Well, I drank too much." "And why did you do that?" She kept it up for half an hour. Then she fined him the maximum fine.
Hilltop Elementary School opened in 1974. In 1982, Henderson High School celebrated its 100th birthday. In 1990, the last class graduated before a merger with the Le Sueur School District. The consolidation has been completed as Le Sueur Henderson School District. Hilltop remains in Henderson. In the 1990s, the Minnesota New Country School began attracting attention for its innovative learning environment. The discovery and study of deformed frogs attracted nationwide interest. The school at first was housed in former business buildings in Le Sueur. In 1997, a new building for the school was built in Henderson. In 1977, the Sibley County Bank, after 102 years on the same corner, moved into a new building. In 1994, the name became Community Bank. Renovations began at the community building in the 1980s. Improvements have continued. The Joseph R. Brown Minnesota River Center, upstairs in the community building, is open to visitors. New landscaping, new playground equipment, and restoration of the fountain are enhancing Community Square. A local history book, Henderson, Then and Now, was published in 1994. The book has provided historical highlights for this pageant. 150 years in the life of Henderson has passed. We are now in the 21st century, in the second year of the new millennium. What does the future hold? What changes will come to pass? Malin Heinz has written a Henderson version of the song, This Land is Your Land. Let's close this Henderson History Highlights pageant by standing and singing together the words printed in your program. This will be led by the cast and hopefully our directors.